This is Magic Mike Young with the beautiful and talented Natalie Chicky, and we're sitting in the cutting room of the one, the only, the legendary Ron Murphy. How are you, sir?
Not too bad today.
Good.
Nobody's bothered me yet. If I can get out of this interview, I'll probably be able to rest comfortably the rest of the day.
Okay, and where are we exactly? What city?
You're in Westland.
Westland? Okay.
Michigan, yeah.
Westland, Michigan.
And you're on the remodeled garage of my house, which is the cutting room now.
Okay.
Where I'm currently at. Originally, I started in Detroit.
Yes, I know.
And, that was a bigger building, and we did a lot of other things. And at one time, I had a bigger house out here in Wayne, Michigan, near where we are now. And I was still doing other things, CD duplication, cassette printing on the shell, and all that. But none of that made any money. The only thing I made any money off of was cutting records for other people.
So, how and when did you get started mastering and cutting records?
Well, it really goes back to a long ways, actually, because I was fascinated with records. One day, and I'm going way back, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. My mother said, she says, I feel like playing some of my records today. She went to the closet and pulled out this old wind-up Victrola, the acoustical one. There's no amplification on it, just the big horn that comes out. And she put on the record, and I remember the record, RCA, Victor record, Rhapsody in Blue, George Gershwin, which still remains, one of my favorite records, for that kind of music. But after it played, she put on something else, and I took the record and I just looked at it and I said, wow, all that beautiful music come out of this. I probably held it in my hand a long, long time. I want to say an hour, but maybe it wasn't that long, But I was really fascinated with it, and right then I think something in my head said, I'll be doing something with records, with these records. Because before then I didn't even realize there was a record. My father was a musician, ended up in Detroit, met my mother there, but she was always like music, and she always had the radio on. And I was thinking, even when I remember going back in my crib, and she had the radio up on the ice box. There was no, when the Iceman came, there was no refrigeration, too much yet. But I remember thinking, I didn't realize there was records, so I just thought they were singing live. And I thought, boy, they have a lot of people at that radio station, because, when they play one record, and I thought that was that group that came up in front of the microphone. Because I think I got that impression maybe from going to the movies. Where there, they did kind of get up in front of a mic, like doing a show on stage. And so I didn't realize until my mother decided that day, to bring out her records and play them. I said, wow, this is what a record is, So, but, a couple of years after that, about 5 years later, I think, I really got interested in records, and I started buying records then at about 11 years old, and, started buying them before I even had a phonograph. I talked my dad into, giving me $23 to go get a little, one of those little record players. And then I got looking at records, and I seen, I kind of got an idea of how they were supposed to be made, the spiral in at the beginning, and those things that were scribed in, the numbers and stuff over by the label and all that stuff, I was kind of gauging that, and I was looking, and I said, well, this is a better record than that one, for whatever reason, or one sounded better to me when I played it, And so I said, I got to get something to make records. And then I seen on the back of this comic book, It said, record your voice at home. We'll give you everything you need. $6.98. I said, wow. You know, I mean, I was a kid. I actually believed you could cut a good record for $6. You know, and, they get you. And
even back then, there wasn't a lot of money.
And I actually, recently, somebody was in here and took a photo of it. I actually picked the original one up on eBay for about $15 in the original box, and I said, oh, I gotta get this. I never thought I'd be able to get it for $15. Brand new. The exact same thing. It's just a big horn. And it's a little tracking disc that fits over the label, and it just moves the horn across, and you can scream as loud as you want, and then play the little cardboard-coated record bag. I heard that, and I said, no, that ain't gonna work, you know. And then we had a place downtown, the Penny Arcade, down by the old Palms Theater there in that building, which is a state theater today in Detroit. And they had a little booth you could go in and record, you know, for a quarter. And so it was a little bit better quality. But anyway, I started then trying to, I ended up getting a little, what they call a home disc recorder, which was a little bit better quality. It was a 1940s machine. And that continued up through about the end of the 60s. And then I finally got a really good setup, but mono. So I was a day late and $1 short there. But mono really hadn't come in, but I had a really great mono system, you know. Cut street, good high fidelity records and loud, you know. And so that lasted a while. Then got out of the business for a while, came back with a partner. We set up National Sound over on Warren near the Southfield Freeway in Detroit. And it was set up as an oldie store, but this guy was interested in cutting records, and that's how I met him, because he was looking for somebody to help him set up a little thing where he could cut records for his jukebox, you know. And we never thought, that there would be anything but records just cut like dubs for people, or maybe collectors wanted to have another copy of something, or like he wanted, transfer something from an old 78 over to a 45 or a 33 so you could play it, you know, something like that. But, you know, as I've told the story dozens of times, you know, what changed it was when Derek May and Juan Atkins walked in, and they looked back into the room where we had this, and it was mostly just for show. And, they knew what it was, because they had cut a couple records in New York, and evidently they weren't happy with them, I think, because the guys weren't putting the bass on the record the way they wanted it, you know. So he asked, could I cut a master on that? And I said, well, we haven't did it. Maybe, the equipment really isn't calibrated really right yet, you know. So he came back the next day with one of the first DAT machines that was imported in, just until they were only little portables. And I'm pretty sure he brought a tape of something that he had already cut. And he said, cut a dub of that. And I remember asking him, I said, well, I put it on in place. I said, well, how do you want it? He said, cut it any way you want to cut it.
Was that Juan or was it Derek?
That was Derek. And I knew why he said that afterwards, because I think he wanted to see, what my ears heard versus what he had it mastered, by. And so I cut it, and I played it, and he jumped up and down, and because I guess I brought up the low end, because what I heard was that the low end on those records needed to be brought up. I was used to the Motown type sound, and, where the bottom meant a lot, in the record. So, yeah, he jumped up and down, and he says, now that's the way a damn record should sound. And then Juan came in the next day to try to test something out, and the system blew up. It just wasn't calibrated right, and then it became the process, and that was 89, of starting to try to calibrate it to where we could cut, really good records loud, So that took a few months, really, on and on.
You're a little more than the Detroit institution. I mean, you're well woven into the fabric of what Detroit techno and the Detroit sound of music is.
Yeah. Well, I think, probably for once, I was probably in the right place at the right time. And I had enough experience at that time to be able to do something. So, that's true in any business, but, I mean, we had the equipment there, and it got out, but, like Derek May said, and I never will forget it, he says, man, you get this stuff running, it'll get you a lot of business, you'll make a lot of money. But I knew in my head at the time, I said, oh, sure, right, if I cut you great records, you're just going to tell everybody where you're getting them cut, right? Yeah, right. So I thought about it, and I went back. I said, I'm going to start putting this NSC on here in a circle. And I said, somebody will figure that out. And sure enough, a couple months later, he comes back in, another record to cut Derek. And he says, yeah, they're asking us where we're getting our records cut, but we're not telling them. And I thought to myself, yeah, I know, you. So that's why I'm putting this NSC, and pretty soon they figured it out. He said, well, that must mean the person that must be cutting that record. So finally got it right, and that's basically the start of NSC or National Sound, or, right there in '89, and eventually closed the record store and just basically ended up just cutting records, and my partner in that died, and because of some legal complications, and I didn't trust the attorneys that they had filled out. I thought we might have some trouble with the IRS. I could have kept the name, but I decided not to. And so I changed it to Sound Enterprises, but I kept writing in the little NSC on the records, and just led up to today, Of course, I was confused with also pressing them too, but, and I still get confused with that. I get emails all the time, how much for 500 copies, and I just tell them, hey, I just cut the masters, I don't press them.
What's the difference from the way you master vinyl as to how vinyl's mastered in Europe?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think I do it any differently, but my equipment's different. I think that's probably a big thing, because, the technique of cutting records is pretty much the same, and anybody that's still cutting is pretty good, that survived it. The ones that weren't pretty good at it just threw their hands up or ended up bald and, pulled their hair out and just gave up, because the records are very demanding. Number one, most of those guys over there are very fond of the Neumann lathe. I never was fond of it. I had one. I exiled it to South Korea because to me it wasn't very good for cutting 12-inch singles. That lathe was made to cut LPs in the 70s, So if you have one of those, in fact, I had a laugh because some of the things I was doing, they had to try to figure out how to make that machine do what I was doing, This machine, I use a very older Scully. All my equipment is American made, number one. Now, that isn't for really any particular reason, but it just ended up that way. I'm not opposed. I love Sony, and their products and stuff. It's also all analog. I use no digital in the mixing or nothing. And I also use a converter to convert back digital sounds to analog to make them sound warmer. So I think I get a head start. I think that the biggest difference that I've been told by one guy at Tresor called me, because, I've always mastered Jeff Mills records, all of them from day one. Even when Mike and him were together and you are, so it's never stopped, even though he went on to form Axis, but he still sends me everything. And of course, they licensed a lot of his things too. And I guess they were having problems. They wanted to cut them over there, and I can understand that for the convenience of, not having to ship everything and all that, And, but the guy from Tresor called me and he says, could you help me out here? He said, we can't seem to get the same good, clean, high end that you get on Jeff's records. Ours is distorted. And so I told him, well, that was a problem with the limiters on the Neumann machine. They were set too high. And, I'm very particular and very sensitive to the high end of a record. I don't like distortion. I found that, we're like in the Exchange in London, and they charge about 3 times as much as I do. But a lot of people thought that was good, that they had made a step upwards, and then I started hearing, my records are distorted, though. Because they could, they try to cut them loud, but, it depends how they're going to play back. You can cut them, as loud as you want, but they still have to play back,
Right.
And you can get to the point where, turntables won't play something really cleanly, So I think that's one of the big differences. And then the way I do everything, they use the computer, and that limits your ability to do certain things. For instance, I got a job from Germany yesterday morning, and I had a couple issues with it, and I'm waiting for an email to approve it. But this guy that sent the job sent it to me because nobody else can do it. What he wanted was, he's got 3 things to be placed on the one side. One track he wants to go the normal way from the outside in, then he's got another track that he wants to go from the label out. So, and then in the middle he wants a 1-groove loop that just repeats itself, And then he wants some spacing and me to write something in there, which is, it's fairly difficult. But see, you can't do that on their lathe. It just isn't going to do it. My records, I can do whatever I want because I do each one by hand. And sometimes I'll customize something for somebody. I did some stuff, Derek May, for example. I want that record, I want the grooves to go right to the label. Okay, so I can do that, Other people, DJ Godfather, I want my spaces. I want a big space between the 2 tracks. If there was 2 tracks on the side, I want a great big space in there. See, on the Neumann, it's set computer to tell you what the space will be, and you will have to go in and unscrew the adjustments and everything to do that. You can't, I can do whatever I want to do because they're all done manually by hand. And, that's why I picked the equipment I did, because I thought about it at the time we did it. And, I said, I don't want to get backed into the corner with something like that. And I said, I'm going to do records, and, people are going to maybe want to, because I could see the market had changed, it was it's sort of an underground thing, and, everybody wanted maybe their own little thing, and to distinguish one from another, So I was able to do that, and, that's why I started getting jobs from overseas, and, I think because, of course, they wanted to duplicate that, and they couldn't do it there. Otherwise, I would have never got jobs, I've got another job from Germany that's coming in a couple days, So I think that's the biggest difference, and, and then the other little subtle difference would be the ear of the the guy that's cutting the records. There's going to be a difference, because I think you could get 10 different record cutting engineers, and the record would probably maybe be 8 of them might be different some way. I would say maybe all of them would be different, because maybe they would say, I want some more low end, I don't like that high end, or I want to add something, So I know Mike Banks had said one time, we was talking about an interview with the Detroit Techno Sound, and he said that, and also my equipment is tuned a certain way. I use equipment that nobody else uses. Number one, the cutting head and the cutting amp is different. Nobody uses it. And the only one in the world uses it. Well, not to be too technical, but your cutting amps are tuned with, there's tuning coils in there to tune that to the head so it cuts properly. And there's a flat setting, or it may be deviate from that, And like Mike said, he said, you're part of our sound, because, your equipment tends to give it that, And in the beginning, we had a thing that was tuned, I think we had more mid-range than it was the flat, and other little things. So, and then like I said, my ear always heard a boost that was needed in the low end on almost all the stuff. Not today so much, but in the beginning, when we were getting stuff on reel-to-reel tape, there's a roll-off. natural roll-off and analog on both ends. But now, when you get to digital, there is no roll-off now. So what you get is sometimes the highs have to be reduced, but the low end, I don't do hardly any boosting because it's really all there, And I think that's the difference. I don't try to reduce the low end because I feel by cutting that off, there's a feel there that people are used to now. And you just can't take it off. They're going to hear something. So I try to lay it all on there. But for other purposes, I do usually today have to reduce the high end a little bit for most records. It's just too much.
Well, let me ask you now. Do you feel like you just specialize in the 12-inch single mixes, or?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I'm constantly battling that. People call me up, do you cut 7-inch records? I said, I cut records, period. That's my job. I cut everything. Everything that can be cut, I cut it. And then also, I get to the point where I've heard even our own local pressing plant. Well, he understands techno good. Well, look I can cut country, western, and everything else. And I really hate that. Because, I understand that different genders of music have their own characteristics to them. And it also depends on the quality of the recording, doesn't it? If it comes, from a really $1 million studio, and I figure everything's set up right, then I'm figuring that they heard exactly what they wanted to hear, and they got it on the master. Therefore, I probably won't deviate from it if it sounds okay, But it depends, sometimes you get in a low-budget studio, hey, I can try to compensate. Maybe I'll give the guy more highs because he didn't get them on there, because he wasn't hearing it right, because of the, low-budget studio. I mean, everything he's playing might be great, but sonically it might be a little bit missing something, and I can understand that, But I, will cut anything, any size, 7-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, whatever it is. That's my job, and all types of music. It don't matter to me, It's cutting a record, and that's what I enjoy. Is like I said back in the beginning, it was just the art of making something from nothing, and actually I made that, and so that's the fun. I still enjoy it today. I will never stop cutting records as long as I can stand up to do it, and as long as somebody wants to do it. Two things there, but I enjoy doing it.
In this day and age, with all the options with audio technology, and it's moving so fast, how much do you think music experience counts these days in making a good record?
A good set of ears.
Well, I don't know about that because, if we go outside of techno, and just go to what you're hearing on the radio, I am not very confident these people know the structure of music very well at all. I hear a lot of stuff, they don't even know how to modulate the tune. It's one thing about Mike. I can always tell it's his playing. I don't care what name he puts on it for an artist. He plays even the keyboards like he's playing the guitar. And his stuff modulates. It rises. A hit record, if it doesn't modulate, it's probably not a hit. Even in techno, and that's why the Jaguar and some of the other things he's cut, if you really listen to them, if you haven't noticed, now you will that I've mentioned this, you'll notice that it rises, it modulates. And that's very conducive, and that's one of the elements of any hit. I think being clever about anything, I don't care what it is. If it's not clever, it's not going to work, like I've said many times, what's the best-selling song of all time? Well, it's very simple. It's I Love You, but cleverly put. I've got sunshine on a cloudy day with my girl. See, not like today's music. Let's get on the floor and do it right now. I want your body. Is that clever? I don't think so. You know what I mean? This is a problem, and I think that radio has really hurt, especially in Detroit. I know probably most of the big cities, they've really hurt their local musicians because they don't want to play local product, and there's good ones. I mean, yeah, there's bad ones too. There's plenty of bad ones. Don't play those. You know, I mean, there's only 3 types of records. You know, I'll still call them records. I don't care what kind of music it is. It's only 3 kinds. There's the hits. And then there's the ones at the bottom, the garbage. Now, nobody's going to play the garbage, especially radio, because you're going to tune the radio off. Then there's the other ones in between. I call those the beautiful nothings. Because they're good enough for you to listen to, and they're good enough for them to play, but they're not good enough for the kids or whoever's buying records to run down and buy it. You see? And that's a fine line, you know. And so I think that, you know, over the years, I finally figured out how to at least get to the beautiful nothing stage, you know, when I was producing records. But it's still a fine line to say, you know, whether it's going to cross over, whether, as Barry Gordy said, we used to bring the kids in there from the high schools on Friday, and he would have dubs cut of all the records, and he would have them listen to it, and he said, now, if I give you $1, will you buy the record or go get a hamburger? And I told a lot, because it, you know, a kid's not going to give up their money unless they really, it crosses that line, you know, that they have to have that. Because I remember when I was a kid, I heard a record, I said, oh, I got to have that. See? Probably went too far with your question.
No, that's quite all right. I was going to ask you, having worked in vinyl for so many years, you think records are still going to be something that endures?
Well, it's
the vinyl records now, the 12-inch.
Right. Well, I think it's I mean, there's a market for 7-inch 245s. I mean, collectors, specialty product. Oh yeah, I've got a girl coming in tomorrow to do a 7-inch, and you know, where they're probably working with the 7 inches is the garage bands, rock and roll bands. They still want the the 7-inch records with the little picture sleeve. They take them out where they're appearing and they can sell them for $5 or more, so it's like a promotion, where they don't have to spend as much money on the 12-inch because really their songs aren't that long, they just got 2 little 3-minute songs and, it fits on a 7-inch, But records, there'll probably be a demand for records long after the ability to make records. But that being said, now there are 12 pressing plants left in this country. They're all busy. There's a couple of them running 16 hours a day. Of course, there's jobs, and of course there's no million pressings off of these jobs. They're mostly in the few hundreds now. But there's plenty of releases for vinyl, but they're mostly promotion, which includes DJs, because that's a promotion to get it to somebody that's playing in a club or something like that. It's just considered, I think, pretty much promotional purposes now. And then, of course, you may get, like I think one of the bands, I think it was the Beatles or somebody a few years ago wanted to make a vinyl set of some of their greatest hits and provide it. And they said, so they knew, because I can quote them, they said, if it hadn't been for techno, we wouldn't be able to do this. So they knew what was up, even though they weren't playing in any techno themselves, but they knew. And they said that right out. And I read it in the magazine. He said, if it hadn't been for techno, we would not be able to do this, because techno and underground has kept that business going, because the majors could have not done it. In fact, they closed their pressing plants, and they closed down their cutting rooms for the most part too. They figured, hey, it's cheaper. Why should we pay a guy to be on staff and the medical benefits and all that when we can just go down the street or send it somewhere, to an independent, which is, what happens. But also recognize that the supplies are in very short supply. I have to say, for this interview, if you're not aware of this, but for the first time in phonograph record history, no vinyl pellets for record pressing is being made in the USA anymore.
Is that partly due because of the oil crisis that's going on now? Or
I'm not sure why, but the last place was in New Jersey, a place called Rimtech, and they shut down. Now, there's only 2 sources worldwide for vinyl. There's the one in Europe, which the machines that were American machines they use in this country has a problem with that. They say they have a real problem using that. The other place was set up in Colombia. So Juan Valdez now is making your records. They may smell like coffee. I'm not sure, but they're coming up on a barge from Colombia. The equipment used to be a California firm that was closed down due to environmental reasons. Now, this company made different things, but they also had a division to make the vinyl pellets, which is used to press records. That was ordered to be shut down by the state of California. I guess the workers or somebody got the equipment and they were supposed to move it to Mexico, but it ended up in Colombia. So, that's the source. I mean, there's only a couple sources for blank records to cut your masters on and so on. The sleeves and all that, there's only 1 or 2 manufacturers. But, they're making money. So I think there was a concern that since there was only one source for vinyl, that this guy could raise his price to whatever he wanted to. But as I told Mike Archer, I said, I don't think that's going to be the case, because if he raises it more than a couple cents a pound to cover the shipping costs, I said, didn't just run most of the remaining people out of the business, he'll cut his own throat. Because it hasn't happened with the lacquers. There's only 2 sources for those, and they've held the price. They just raised it like maybe 50 cents a lacquer. And it's been like maybe $1 or $1.50 over the last 10 years. So, and they've said, we know we got to hold the price because, we don't want to, we're making okay money and we want to continue in this business. So they understand that, and I think that's the same case with the vinyl. I don't really see a problem with, vinyl going up to the point where, maybe more than maybe add on maybe a nickel a record the next year or so, but, I don't think that's a big deal.
I have to ask you, that day that Derek and Juan walked into your shop,
yeah,
did you actually think that that's what was going to be a turning point in your career? Did you actually realize just what kind of impact that you were going to have?
No, because, like I said at that time, I didn't think there was anything going on in Detroit, and I did not know about techno. And of course, it was early on, and I think, like I said, they had only put out a couple of, there was no UR at that time. Jeff and Mike, I think, were just getting together, and they were doing UR productions for, KMS, which had just started, you know what I mean? They didn't even have a label. And, so, no, I didn't really understand it till probably a year later. And it really, it's really started to take off. And then you had the second generation of people starting, the Richie Hawtins and, who I had said at that time, well, here it is now. He's the Elvis Presley of techno, and, and that's the way it turned out, And, but yeah, I didn't realize it right then, that first day. There was not too much, to know about it because it was a new thing. And I didn't know about the European scene and the DJs and, how that would influence everything. Really didn't know that at that time. I was basically sort of as far as music, a radio pro. I'm looking at radio and, soul and R&B was my thing, and that's what I used to do in the studios, as an engineer at that time. So my focus was there, But these kids, I called them kids then. I used to be called Uncle Ron, And I know, like me and Mike would go to lunch and he'd talk about things, and I'd talk about the way that the things used to be in New York or the way Motown did them. And, they got some ideas about their contracts and different things. And, we'd talk about that. But, I tried to get these guys, wrongly so. I said, you got to get this stuff on radio. You got to do some edits, you got to do something, get on radio. Of course, I was always looking at that scene, But like, I think Mike said it himself. He says, it's all bought and paid for. And we know that. We don't need them. We don't need them. And he was right, And it's still all bought and paid for. And you can't get in it. So they took the route and went through the back door, and a lot of them were successful. If you really worked at it and you did hard, you could have a success, at it. And I gotta give them credit. And there was nobody to teach them anything. Like I said, when I came up, I learned from real radio people, and they showed me the proper way of recording. I give these kids credit. They didn't have anybody, because there was nothing here in Detroit. Nothing at that time. Everything was gone. It was zero. And they did it on their own. And I think one thing that I did, in the beginning, I did give them a lot of tips. We would work for hours on cutting a record because it was not properly done. It was out of phase. There was something wrong with it. And we would work to try to get it as good as possible. And then they learned. I know Richie Hawtin. He started out, we worked for hours on his first record. And then he took it and played it and figured out what was wrong with his studio. Pretty soon, like all of them, like Mike and all of them, they started coming in with stuff that never needed to be touched. It got very close. You might just touch it up a little bit here or there, So, but if they were interested in making good records, then they asked those questions. And then, that helped them make better records. And they, for the most part, those were the successful people. People that just didn't care, they weren't successful, especially continuously. You can always get lucky, but to stay doing it constantly, like Mike for 16, 17 years. You have to actually work at it.
So, out of all the Detroit electronic records that you did master, which record did you find to be the most bizarre record?
Well,
what is this?
Well, there's different kinds, But I would say my favorite bizarre. I can tell you that one. It's a Carl Craig record. It's called "Wrap Me in Its Arms" by a girl from England called Sarah Gregory. Because he's playing one thing and she's singing entirely something else. I mean, they don't match at all, but it's actually good. I mean, it's what I call bizarre.
In
are just unbelievable. I mean, but I can't recall any of them because those are the ones you want to forget. But there have been some that you say, oh my God, and I'm just sitting here, trying to figure out, because some of them, you do realize they're kind of crazy, but they're actually good, and you can understand why. Some of them are just so ridiculous that, they're so amateurish that, it's hard to believe that what would be the reason this person would think that this needs to be on a record and that somebody else is going to buy it, But yeah, the Sarah Gregory record, that's probably back from 1990. And I had a chance to meet her. Very nice girl. And he tried to record her, but I don't think she ever got, the right record and everything, because I think she was pretty good. And she was nice looking and had a pretty nice tone. But this thing here, like I said, the track, but it's really interesting. I still have the record. Because I did eventually get rid of a lot of the stuff, just got to be too many, but I wouldn't let that one go. That's sort of great. It's like I said, it's what I call bizarre, but in a good way, so if you ever find that record, play it and you'll see what I'm saying.
What's your favorite record, the one that's the jam to you?
Okay, the one I get out, which I have in my little stack, I would say there's probably 3 or 4 that I consider, something really clever. Like I said, the number 1 record would probably be, if I had to go through numbers, probably I play it more than anything else, is called The Choice by Ches Demir on KMS. The message there, not that, it was a very cleverly put gay message, by Anthony Pearson, who's Ches Demir, right? But, yeah.
So you mean happy message or sexual message?
Yeah, I think, the choice, it's up to you, you know what I mean?
Oh.
But the music, the production, the sing, everything is so great about that record. And that record brought me a lot of business, by the way. Here's a funny story that emulated from that particular record. Some label called me up, I guess a bigger time label, I don't recall now, but this guy started asking, he says, I think, are you the one that cut The Choice on KMS? I said, yeah, that's me. He said, oh, yeah. He said, well, what about Living for the Night? On UR, Yolanda. I said, yeah, I cut that too. He said, oh, yeah, you're the one. Then he rattled off a bunch more, yeah, you're the one. We gotta have you cut our records. I said, okay, cool, that's good. So he said, yeah, we'll get a hold of you, So I said, okay, great, because we put out a lot of records. I said, good, I'd like to hear that, because I got a lot of bills, So, and about 30 minutes later, somebody else calls me and he says, I'm so-and-so, I'm the technical advisor for whatever the label was and the guy that had just called about 30 minutes before. And I said, okay, just wanted to ask you some questions. He said, I know you use a Neumann lathe, right? I said, no, I don't like Neumann. Oh, well, what kind of board do you have? I said, I don't have a board, I have a line mixer. Oh, this guy was about to have a stroke. He said, well, what kind of EQs? And I said, well, wait a minute now. I said, first of all, what you got to understand is I'm not a studio. I don't need a console mixer. I just need something to bring up levels. I said, but I know where you're going with this. I said, what you got to understand, your friend called and likes the records I cut. Now, what difference does it make to you if I put a thimble and needle on my thumb and cut them? What possible, why would you care how I do it? Well, of course, I never got any jobs from so-called labels. So, that's a problem that you have, with some people perceive what they think something should be, And, I've had even people from Detroit come in and got the same equipment. Yeah, we don't want to cut. Oh, we need to go to Europe because they got the XYZ new crap thing. But, once again, it all goes back to, is records new? I mean, they're limited. Your record can only do so much. And they figured that out 30 years ago. So, but one guy come in and he said, you know what you ought to do? He said, just take everything and shuffle it around in the rack. He said, they'll never know. They'll think you got something new. Because I've had people that, since I've left Detroit, by the way, for some reason they want to hold that against me. They prefer to send their cutting business out of town. Because somehow I defected somehow, after 47 years, And I take offense with that. I had one of them call me up, a very famous name, by the way, that we've already mentioned in this interview, and said, wow, I just heard that record you cut for Mike, and wow, man, you must have some new equipment. I said, no, it's the same stuff. I said, but what you got to remember is that you all improved. Your stuff is better, cleaner now. And you figured out how to do it better. The next one, that was kind of a hit for what it was. Now the next one was not, I guess, so big, but I really still think this is probably one of the greatest things in techno, or if you want to call it that was ever done in the last 16, 17 years. And it's a Jeff Mills and Mike Banks production on UR. I don't know what the artist was, but the title of it's called The Theory. And I just think that's like, wow, what, that was saying, is just, the idea was so damn clever. I know that Jaguar is a good record. Now, I prefer one of the follow-ups to that a little bit better. The Timeline.
Oh,
Another
yeah.
UR.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I just like the way the way it's going in there, and you'll notice that modulates. It's constantly rising. Check it out, when you think about that. It's constantly rising upwards.
allowing us to come out and interview, Ron.
You're very
It's
welcome.
been a pleasure to talk to you.
It's very nice to see you. Very nice, beautiful lady. That makes it even better.
Thank you again for spending some time with us. And we've been talking to Mr. Ron Murphy, the master of the masters for Detroit Techno and Detroit music.
Just trying to keep vinyl alive. That's my motto.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
You're welcome.
This is Torque from The Plan, and you listen to Submerge Podcast. Believe what you hear.